Hey guys, just like promised, here's part 2. By the way, I don't like the red color, so please go down and hit subscribe. And I really like the white on the thumbs up. Alrighty, enjoy.
Seven Blue Skies channel presents Paranormal, Book 3, Part 2, Legend of the Loch Ness Monster by Dr. Ahmed Khalid Tawfiq. Sir James Manor was a very depressing place. In every corner of it I was reminded of Scotland's many ghosts we see in the movies. The armored knights standing in the hallways looked alive, about to move at any second. And, of course, there must be a whole network of passages and forgotten graves and maybe a buried treasure under the manor. Graham, the prudish, smart-ass butler, stirred horror and a sense of pessimism in my soul. If this were an Agatha Christie story, we would have found Sir James murdered in his library, and the famous detective, Hercule Poirot, would find no better suspect than this mysterious head butler. But this isn't an Agatha Christie story, luckily for Sir James, or unluckily for me. Sir James walked with me between the paintings, introducing me to his notable family, of which he was the last according to next of kin, and in reality, because he never had a male heir. He was in love with medicine, so he studied hard and became a doctor and a professor to me and others. My family goes back to the era of Macbeth himself. Macbeth? Laughing cheerfully, he said, "I don't believe you spent 2 years in Scotland without knowing that the Shakespearean character, Macbeth, was Scottish." "But he's a fictional character," I protested. "No," he remarked. "The historical basis of the play is accurate, except that Macduff did not kill him. He actually lived until the year 1055, and died of natural causes. And he was followed by Malcolm III in the year 1058. And then the vast, complicated history of Scotland continued with the dynasties of kings who ruled us from the palace of Holyrood House." He then put a hand on my shoulder and led me to his study, saying, "But let's leave this topic, and come see the photos Maggie has taken of your monster." On his vintage desk the photos Maggie had taken this morning were spread about. And they were, as I expected, very poor quality and blurry, with the drops of water on the camera lens making it even worse. He sat at his desk. "A total failure, huh?" he asked while handing me a cigar. "I warned her," I said. "But there is something new worthy of interest," said Sir James. "The Loch Ness Monster has changed his pattern of appearing." "Pattern?" He smiled kindly and answered, "Of course. After all, he is a British monster, very organized and meticulous, and his presence is not at all random." He reached into his desk and took out a large paper and placed it on his desk. The paper showed multiple red and green dots and arrows scattered about an accurate drawing of the North Scottish coastline. He explained that this drawing represented an attempt at specifying the places and dates of the beast's appearances, and connecting these with the astronomical positions, the phases of the moon, and natural phenomena like the low and high tides. It was clearly moving in concentric circles about 100 meters from Urquhart Castle, and it clearly chose nights with no moon and low tide, waiting until midnight or later to appear. Sir James' drawing provided me with a meticulous expectation of where and how it would appear the next time. "In August of this year," he said, "it should appear here at midnight on the 11th, and on September 6th it'll appear here at midnight." Surprised, I exclaimed, "This is very well done. So all you need is to be there at that moment with your cameras and spotlights." "We haven't done so yet," he explained, "and I'll tell you why in just a moment." And looking at the complicated map in front of me, I remembered something. Well, where does it go in between appearances? Where is its lair? Sir James scratched his head and mumbled, "That is the question, as Hamlet says. There are 2 possibilities. The first is that it lives in a cave beneath the lake. And you know the famous saying that in every underwater cave in Scotland there is a legendary monster. The second possibility is that it lives in the North Sea, and in January or February, at high tide, it manages to enter Loch Ness through one of Caledonia's 7 canals. But a lot of questions surround this creature. 5. Sacrifice Rock. Sir James continued, "The media favors the second probability, especially since the beach is not even visible in the years with no tide. The North Sea is full of secrets, and it holds the possibility of hundreds of beasts like ours." "And what do you think?" I asked. "I'm neutral. Trial and error is the only measurement I know." With enthusiasm, I asked, "Why not stretch a net, like the ones they put around ports to prevent enemy submarines from entering, to block the Caledonia Canal?" "And then?" he asked coldly. "And then we'll know. If the monster never appears again in Loch Ness, we'll know it is trapped in the North Sea." "Ah, you're still as hasty as ever," he said, and went on explaining what I had missed. "It would require a net about 2 kilometers in length and 260 meters high to block off the canal. So how would you make it? And how would you prevent the sea traffic? And even supposing we did so, we won't prove anything if the beast was already in the lake the moment we throw the net. It'll keep appearing as usual. Try to think of another solution." I thought quickly, but did not reach any conclusion, and told him so. While playing distractedly with a pen, he murmured, "The sonar. The ultrasonic waves. It's capable of monitoring the canal entrance without blocking it. It can effortlessly and affordably study the depths." And the sound physics department, under Maggie's supervision and the approval of Bertrand White, manager of the canal, is monitoring the 7 channels during the flooding season using a complicated technology of sonography. "And the result?" I prompted. "Negative. Only fish have passed the Caledonian Canal. And in any case, Nessie returned to its habits. So what can we guess based on that?" I answered, "That the beast was always there, at the bottom." "That's it," he said, and he stood and paced the room, hands behind his back. And after contemplating for some moments, he told me, "I have noticed that the monster tends to appear in a circular range whose center is near Urquhart Castle. Commander R.T. Gold aimed to define the exact center of the circle, and he found that in the center of the circle where the beast appears is a huge rock in the middle of the lake. And we have secretly inspected this rock using shovels, and we found human bones, all of which were hand and wrist bones. And we also found a wooden box, which disintegrated in our hands as we tried to remove it, inside of which was a strange-looking pendant, an ivory horn, and a leather scroll." I froze in my seat, as the story had taken a thrilling new direction indeed. I love this kind of stuff, and I think most of you share my opinion. But Sir James continued, "And this is the scroll." He reached into his desk drawer and took out something old and eaten. On it were faded, primitive drawings, boats, people, and something resembling a snake emerging from the water, and I didn't understand any of this and did not attempt to. "You know, of course," said Sir James, "that Scotland was occupied by the Viking tribes and the Celts in the 12th century, in the era of King David, son of Henry I and Matilda." Of course I knew nothing about this, but nodded wisely as if to say this was a very old and repetitive piece of information. He went on, saying, "We have reason to believe that this scroll belonged to the Viking tribes, and it tells a very interesting story. We have studied it thoroughly, and I will explain it to you. The first scene depicts the angry gods, and I think here it shows Odin, whom the ethnic Vikings worshipped. The second scene shows a snake-like monster with a horse's mane as it attacks people from the water. And the third scene shows a man blowing into a horn on one of the beaches. The fourth scene is of a girl tied to the rock, her bottom half dangling in the water, while the beast approaches to devour her. On her chest you can see a specific pendant. Now, notice that the moon does not appear in the picture. So now we can put the story together. The Vikings, or the Celts, used to present offerings to the Loch Ness monster so as to leave the people alone because they thought this was revenge from their ethnic god Odin. The offerings were presented to the creature on that rock in the form of virgin girls, chained and wearing the sacrificial pendant. You see, the priest would stand near Urquhart Bay and blow into the horn, and then the water moves and the beast's head emerges from its cave. That must have been a very dramatic scene, one I would not like to witness. And this was happening regularly, according to the religious calendar of these tribes, about which I know nothing, unfortunately. But we can predict it. And with time, the Vikings and Celts disappeared. So what did this poor beast do without its source of food? It went back to sleeping in its cave, depressed, waiting to hear once again the sound of the horn calling it to dinner. And with time it learned to eat fish, but is still roaming around Sacrifice Rock at the exact times it learned, the timings of the Vikings' offerings. For the taste of these beautiful girls stayed alive in its memory, and it longs for those days to return. Any questions? After coughing lightly to clear my throat, I asked, "Is it the same Viking monster? I mean, how can a creature live from the era of the Vikings up until today? Around 8 centuries. Maybe, Sir James speculated, there were more than one, and they were reproducing, the offspring inheriting vague memories of Sacrifice Rock. Or maybe it is the same monster, and if its existence is a scientific phenomenon, then why not its age as well? Turtles, for example, may live for 2 centuries, so why not 8 for this thing?" I wondered. And the pendant? He must have swallowed it every time. So how? They used to make a new sacrificial pendant every time. That's not difficult or expensive. I thought about his words for a moment before saying, "Actually, your theory seems to hold up. And allow me to add that the Viking ships which roamed the North Sea often had a wooden beast head carved into their bows, which looks a lot like how we imagine Nessie, as if they wanted to please Odin or prevent the beast from attacking them. It must have been terrifying when it appeared to their ships on the dark nights in the middle of the ferocious North Sea." I was shaken as I imagined this scene. Thank God I wasn't there. Gathering his papers, Sir James said, "But I haven't yet told you the most dangerous aspect of this topic. I have stolen the pendant and the horn from Commander Gold under mysterious circumstances." "You stole?" "Yes," he said, "and then something new happened, which is that the beast started to appear at irregular intervals, which means someone is using the horn to call it whenever he pleases." "But for what purpose?" I asked. "I had given you a hint about that last night," he explained. "We visited the rock 2 weeks ago, Maggie and I, and we found 2 chains attached to the rock and dangling in the water. We pulled the chains to find—" "Can you guess what we found?" I was horrified. "No, don't say it." "Yes," said Sir James, "exactly as you guessed. 2 hands up to the wrist, bound by the chains and totally amputated. They are all that's left of a human the beast had devoured completely. He left the chain part because he could not pull it out. The hands were delicate, which implies a young girl's hands. And in the city, the police were looking for a blonde named Jocelyn who had disappeared 3 days before. They found no trace of her. But, of course, you don't need a lot of intelligence to know where this Jocelyn went." Feeling dizzy, I exclaimed in disgust, "Sir James, do you mean there is someone who is again offering human sacrifices to the Loch Ness monster?" "Exactly. And whether this person is a serial killer, or mentally ill, or a mad scientist, the result is the same. And he knows exactly what we know. He kidnaps the girl, ties her to the rock, and then calls the beast with the horn to send her to Valhalla." "How terrible!" I exclaimed. His voice gaining an unnecessary dramatic tone, Sir James added one last point. "This girl is of Swedish origin, which means that her grandfathers were from the northern invaders." 6. The basement. I sat next to Maggie in the sitting room that evening. I felt so surprised and amazed at seeing her, this gentle girl, or rather woman, who still clings to me, hiding inside her strength I never knew she had. She knows everything she knows, and she never told me. Here she is supervising a big project in monitoring the Caledonian Canal with the ultrasonic waves, without leaking a word about it this whole time. She saw that heinous scene on Sacrifice Rock, and she didn't break down or lose her senses. How strange you are, Maggie. Your mystery exceeds all my abilities and expectations. I asked her, "Why didn't you tell me?" "About what?" About what your father told me today, about the lake monster. Looking into my eyes with a steady gaze, she said, "Okay, what exactly did he tell you? How much do you know about this?" Once again, she surprised me. She feared that my talk was an attempt at making her tell what she knew. The important thing is that I started, without reservation, telling her everything Sir James had told me as she listened silently. I then asked her, "Why didn't you tell the police about what you found on the rock? I mean, they're more capable of finding the horn and the necklace thief." She smiled coyly and said, "The police will never catch the thief, because he left no evidence." "At least you could have surveilled the rock to prevent the death of another girl." "Rifat," she exclaimed, "you don't get it. We have a bigger purpose than all of this. Don't make my father regret telling you what you shouldn't have known." Sighing wearily, I replied, "Okay, then this vacation is over. I'll go back to Edinburgh tomorrow. So I have nothing to do with your shady project." With kindness I had almost forgotten, she said, "You promised me you would stay forever. At least stay with us this week, because my dad won't be going back to Dundee tomorrow." She then flicked the end of my nose with her index finger and said, "Trust me, Rifat. Trust us." For a few moments there was silence but for the ticking of the clock. I rose and started pacing the room, back and forth until I stopped in front of an oil painting hung over the fireplace. It depicted a shepherd playing a melody to his lover. I contemplated the painting for a second before turning away, but here a thought struck me. I looked at the painting again. The faint outline of a handprint showed on the surface of the paint, as if a hand was pressed onto the painting in that position, which would cause the residual sweat to degrade some of the oil paint. I didn't hesitate. I stretched my hand to the same position and pressed. It was pressable, and right away I felt mechanical gears of some kind moving, and in spite of the rust covering the whole thing, the wall moved backwards, making a mechanical sound which hurt my teeth, and I saw what seemed to be a staircase carved from stone. Maggie looked at me in wonder, and her features were honestly surprised. She really didn't know about this secret door. I told her, "This is such a cliché in these Scottish estates, the magic door which leads to some kind of exit. But does your father know about this?" She shook her head in wonder. "I don't know. I know this manor is full of secret passageways, but I have never seen one." What an idiot I am! I've spent my whole life wondering about the secret of this handprint on the painting, but I never tried pressing it, and I don't think any of the servants have either. Only with the duster, of course. I smiled in satisfaction and took off my suit jacket. Then I pulled a candle from the sconce on the fireplace wall and lit it with a match. "But," Maggie protested, "where do you think you're going?" Pushing my body into the opening in the wall, I said, "Weird question. I'm going to Disneyland." Frightened, her body trembling, she asked, "Isn't it better to wait until we tell Daddy?" I gave her a meaningful look and said, "Ah, my angel, I'm not one of those strong-willed people who find a secret passage in an old Scottish manor and don't enter it. I can't resist." "Wait," she shouted frantically. "I'm coming with you. I want to make sure you're not going to die." "But—" And before I knew it, Maggie and I entered the basement, descending the stone steps, taking care for the candle flame. There were just a few stone steps, thankfully, and at the bottom we saw a long underground passage. The air was stagnant and foul-smelling, and— What was that sound? And why has the basement suddenly gotten so pitch black? Maggie looked up at me and said, "It's nothing, just that the wall has closed behind us." What an idiot! It was only open for a limited time, and it closes afterwards. Why didn't I make Maggie stay outside, or rig something to prevent the wall from closing? They always remembered these small details in the movies, but I'm not a movie star and was not trained for these things. And now, here we stand in this bleak basement without a weapon or a source of light except for this candle. Maggie, my angel, I fear we're in a real bind here." Her eyes shone in the darkness by the light of the candle. She clapped her hands and exclaimed, "This is the best experience of my life! Imagine, You and me together in this scary basement, feeling the walls shaking, walking in the dust between the bodies of mice and the bones of those who went before us. And then we get hungry and thirsty, and you will do anything for me. You take off your shirt to shelter me from the cold, and it ends with me dying in your arms. Isn't that amazing? You are a total fool, I thought. Women have an uncanny ability to find romance in situations which only bring disasters for men. And after a few hours of sadness for me, you die, and both of our corpses decay. And after hundreds of years, someone discovering this gravesite will find two skeletons hand in hand, and they will try to separate them, but they turn into dust. I told her sarcastically, "Yeah, like Esmeralda and the Hunchback of Notre Dame." "Yes, exactly," she exclaimed. "Did you ever read it? It's a real tearjerker." I didn't know what to do. Should I strangle her? Should I rip her apart? Or would punching her in the teeth suffice? I just played along, telling her, "There's still some time before this amazing ending, so I say we should move now. This place is not romantic enough to die for." Regaining her composure, she looked around her and said, "But there must be an exit from this side." "That's reasonable," I conceded. "I mean, the one who invents a way in invents a way out." And we started feeling our way along the stone walls, stone by stone, pressing every protruding surface and every unstable rock. And we stomped around every part of the floor and even went back up the stairs to recheck the wall. But it was no use. Her normal features having returned, Maggie said, "If we continue with these futile attempts, we're definitely going to die down here. It seems like there's no choice but to follow the passage to the end." "But the candle," I exclaimed. She took out a silk handkerchief from her dress pocket and wetted it with her saliva. She then rolled it into a ball and stuffed it into her mouth for a few seconds. She motioned for me to bring the flame near it, and the fire started catching very slowly despite the wetness. Just like that. "Now, put out your candle until we need it." Amazed, I asked her, "Who taught you that trick?" Holding the lit handkerchief with the tips of her fingers, she anchored it into a piece of bone and replied, "During World War II, the housewives in London and Paris, to save power, used wet newspaper to light their ovens, and one newspaper was enough to cook a meal for a whole family." I was 13 years old back then. Oh, my dearest, how can I play the role of your protector when it seems like you're the one taking care of me? We walked along the passageway in silence. Here mice played in total freedom, and here puddles of stagnant water, possibly built up from the moistness through the centuries. For as long as I live, I will always remember our gloomy walk. She was one step ahead of me, carrying the flaming handkerchief, throwing mysterious shadows around her. And how much do I fear mysterious shadows? It was as if she were coming from another world, leading me to what no other human had seen before. Was Dante feeling the same feeling when Beatrice led him into the darkness of the other world? And just then we became aware of what she had expected jokingly a few minutes ago: human bones scattered carelessly between the rocks along with the bones of mice. I was reluctant to tell her that this means just one thing, that there is no exit from this basement, and that those miserable ones who tried before us had failed. They ate the mice alive, and the mice ate them alive. No doubt this basement was formerly a prison where the nobility would throw their enemies, leaving them to rot alive. But Maggie was smart. Thus she told me sadly, "Rifat, you know what I think?" "What's that?" "We're not going to get out of this basement alive." 7. The Dilemma. The problem with the narrator style I use in telling my stories is that it automatically reassures the reader that I'm going to survive every ordeal I pass through. Otherwise, I wouldn't have lived to tell the story. And had I written in the third-person voice, i.e., went, ran, got scared, then the reader would not be so certain of my safety. Yes, I confess that I survived all these ordeals in my life, up until this moment in which I write. And I confess that I never died up to now. But what horror and terror have I been through in each of these ordeals? Here's an example for you. I walked behind Maggie and her handkerchief torch, the flames dancing, casting mysterious shadows on the skulls scattered here and there, which made them look like they were moving and smiling. So, how do you expect us to survive this? Everything in the basement looked the same. We must have been walking for kilometers in that interminable passageway when Maggie stopped, whispering, "I can't walk any more, Rifat." She was breathing hard, and she sat on the ground in her elegant dress and took off her shoes. "I'm dying of cold in spite of it being July." "It's because of the dampness," I said as I sat next to her and took off my Oxford shirt, placing it over her shoulders. With some gloating, I told her, "Romantic, isn't it?" "Shut up." And then, disgusted, from between her teeth, she hissed, "We're going to have to learn how to eat mice." This heinous idea really shook me, so I swallowed hard and replied, "I would starve for a week before I would accept the idea." As if spitting, she said, "If you hadn't acted like an idiot and entered the secret passage, we wouldn't be here. And if you didn't follow me stupidly, you could have saved me." She trembled and curled herself up like a cat. Then she drew closer to me and said, "We'll wait here until morning. Let's put out the torch, as we don't need it temporarily. I hope you have enough matches." Of course, very few. That's how the story always goes. The one who has a box of matches never loses his way in dark passageways. What a jinx you are. I snuffed out the handkerchief and rubbed my hands together against the cold. I started humming an Arabic song in a very low voice, and in the dark I heard Maggie's breathing starting to even out. The poor girl had slept. When we awoke, the lit hands of my watch pointed at 9 a.m. Maggie was sitting, running her fingers through her hair, trying to tidy it somehow. I smiled sarcastically, saying, "Here she is, the cave beauty starting her day." In a sleepy voice she countered, "If I look anything like you do upon waking up, you bum, I think we should never marry. I mean, what fault would our children have in seeing their dad so frightful looking?" I almost replied with a harsh comeback, but instead I noticed something important and exclaimed, "Maggie, have you noticed? I can see you and you can see me. It's not so dark down here in the daytime. Last night I couldn't see my own hand in the dark." "Meaning?" she prompted. "It means there is light entering this basement from somewhere. True, it's still very weak, but it exists, and we shall find it." So, just like that, without breakfast and without washing our faces, we stood up determined and started our walk without needing to light the torch. Undoubtedly, the light was getting brighter with each step we took. And suddenly, we bumped into the unexpected. The passage split into 3 smaller passages, all of them filled with the same weak light. What a dilemma! We chose the middle passage and walked together for some time before finding it also splitting into 2 passages. Here I grabbed Maggie's hand to prevent her from going forward and said, "No, this is turning into a real maze. We'll get lost in here forever. We have to be systematic. We'll follow the famous Theseus style. First, on the walls we'll carve lines showing which passages we've been through. Secondly, we have to separate so each of us can explore these 2 branches, and then we'll meet here after 2 hours, no matter what happens. And whoever finds the way out," said Maggie, "will draw crooked lines on the way back, to be different from our lines in the other passages." "Okay," I said. "Give me the pen in my shirt pocket." And I broke my pen into 2 halves, which worked to carve on the walls. I gave her half and wished her good luck, and we separated. Now I have to hurry. I chose the passage on the right, which led me to 2 other passages. I chose the right one and followed it for some time until I found it blocked by a rock wall. I went back and this time chose the left passage, following it for some minutes until I reached a point where it branched into 3 passages. I chose the middle one, and, like that, you can imagine the complicated path I took. I'm tired just writing this down, so imagine actually living it. I wonder what kind of sadistic mind designed these passages. Half an hour passed, and I was still in the maze when suddenly I noticed footprints. Clear footprints in the dust which covered the rocks. These footprints were not mine nor Maggie's, as they were too large. I followed the footprints, not forgetting to draw the lines on the wall as I walked. My heart was shaking. These can't be the footprints of one of these corpses because they're new and soft, and their owner wore modern-style shoes. I noticed the light growing stronger and stronger until... Finally! I've made it. I had found an opening in the rock wall, an opening blocked by iron bars which someone had sawed through. Through this opening came the light we saw upon entering this bleak basement. I peered through the opening in the rock to see what it overlooked. Outside the opening, water splashed and lapped at the walls. By the cheerful morning sun I saw the lake, Loch Ness, and it was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. I could see the rocky beach beneath the opening, and in the distance I could see the huge, bleak-looking stone alone in the midst of the waves, oblivious to the waves crashing and to me. On the rock an old wooden pole lay with a nylon rope hanging from it. It took little smarts to realize this was Sacrifice Rock, which Sir James had told me about yesterday. Yesterday? Was that really just yesterday? In any case, I had found what I sought, and I only had to return back while drawing the crooked lines next to the straight ones and wait on Maggie at our meeting point. Then we could get out of this place together. I reached the meeting point as the hour neared 11 a.m. I sat on the floor awaiting Maggie while humming that sad Arabic song and pondering the meaning of what I had seen so far. Apparently this passage was blocked off by those iron bars. It was a true grave for whoever had the bad luck to be thrown into it. And then came that good man who cut through the bars, giving himself a chance to enter and exit the manor whenever he wanted, and able to reach Loch Ness easily and secretly, not knowing, of course, that he also gave us a chance at life. But who is this person, and what does he want? I don't know, and I don't care to know currently. But I had drifted behind my notions and missed that the time had passed quickly. The time was now 11:30, and Maggie was not back. Did the passages she followed branch out so much, to that extent? Or did she foolishly forget to draw the lines? Or had she bumped into some kind of danger, a pit or an unsteady rock, which delayed her? The snakes of worry bit into my heart, and I had no choice but to find her. I stood up and walked carefully into the passage she chose. The lines she had drawn on the walls were clear and organized, to the point that I imagined her delicate hands drawing them 2 hours ago. Weird, ominous longing filled my soul as I regarded the lines, as if she who drew them would never return. This network of passageways was very complicated, but I followed her lines interminably. But am I imagining things? No. The drops of the blood on the floor were real. It's Maggie's blood. End of Part 2. Please leave us a comment, let us know what you think. It's important to us. And if you liked this video, don't be stingy, hit that like button. Cheers.